Hello everyone. Let's discuss about how input, output and inter-process communication is carried out in the Linux operating system today. So first is about input and output in the Linux operating system. So basically, we have already seen that anything which is capable of sending or receiving data as a stream, anything which is capable of sending or receiving a stream of data will be considered as a will be considered for input output. It will be considered as an object in the Linux operating system. So in that context, one more thing is the Unix file system or the Linux file system is object oriented, which means everything will appear like everything will be considered as an object. So in that context, your device drivers will also appear like normal files to the user, and it will also be one form of object. So the user can open any access channel to any input output device, and he can operate with the devices just like he operates with objects within the file system. The devices also can be considered as normal objects within the file system. So from that you can understand that devices also appear like objects within the file system, and the file system follows an object oriented principle, which means everything will be considered as an object. Everything will be considered as an object, and anything which is capable of sending or receiving a stream of data will be considered as an object. And because of this, just like a user can open a file before he wants to read or write to the file, just like that he can open any access channel to any device, and he can work with the device as if they are objects within the file system. So in today's lecture, we are going to see how that in Linux, the devices are split up into three different classes, namely block devices, character devices, and network devices. So we are going to see about each of them in detail. So this is your device driver block structure. So you can see that, as I told, there are basically three categories of devices: block devices, character devices, and network devices. Before going into the details about all these types of devices, let's see the device driver block structure. So here you can see the block device driver. For every type of device, we know that we'll be having a device driver. What is the meaning of device driver is, device driver is nothing but a computer program which controls a particular type of device which is attached to the computer. Okay, for every type of device you're going to have a device driver. For example, you may have a device driver for sound card, you may have a device driver for video card, etc. For every device you are going to have a device driver, and that device driver is nothing but bits of code which will act as interface between the hardware and the operating system. Okay, the hardware, that is the actual device, and the OS. Between the hardware and the OS, an interface is created with the help of the device driver, and many times usually students get confused whether device driver is a hardware or a software. It is nothing but a bits of code or program. It's just nothing but a program only. So it acts as interface between that particular device which it is controlling with the operating system. So here for block devices, you have a block device driver, and then you can see the file system and the block device file associated with it. Similarly, for character devices, you have the character device driver and character device file associated with it. For network device drivers, you have the network protocol driver and the network socket associated with it. Apart from this, you can also see the TTY driver and line discipline. TTY is usually a terminology used to indicate teletype. Okay, so the meaning of this is that, so here TTY driver is responsible for the TTY, the low level physical driver, and this TTY driver will handle the transfer of data to and from the actual hardware. Okay, TTY driver and the low level physical driver will actually handle the transfer of data to and from the hardware. Then what is the meaning of this line discipline? Line discipline will process the data which it receives from the TTY driver. Line discipline will process the data which it receives from the TTY driver, and then it will take care of the transfer of data between the kernel space and the user space. So that is the use of the TTY driver and line discipline. The meaning of TTY driver is, TTY is a term used to indicate teletype, where back in those olden days when Linux was developed, we had an input device called as teletype which resembled a typewriter. So that's why it's called TTY driver. And The TTY driver and the low level physical drivers will handle the transfer of data to and from the hardware, and then they will give the data to the line discipline. Line discipline will process the data and it will take care of transferring the data between the kernel space and the user space inside the memory. Okay, this is about the device driver block structure. Next, we will see about the three types of devices, input-output devices in the Linux operating system. First is the block devices. So what is the meaning of block devices is? Block devices is nothing but all types of devices which control or allow random access to fixed size blocks of data is called block device. As soon as we hear the term random access, first thing which will come into our mind is any disk model of execution will allow for random access, right? Imagine your hard disk structure. So you have a read-write head. The read-write head will move, and it is possible to access any sector on the disk randomly by the read-write head. So all such types of devices which allow random access to independent fixed size blocks of data will be called as block devices. Example is your hard disk, your floppy disk, CD-ROMs, flash memory, everything will come under the category of block devices. And mostly we will use this type of block devices to store file systems. We know that all along we have been learning a lot about file systems, and we will be using magnetic hard disks to store file systems. And we have also learned that a separate partition in the hard disk may be used to store a file system, or you can reserve an entire hard disk also to store a file system. So block devices only are typically used to store file systems. And another important thing is users can also directly access the file systems. It is allowed for the users or applications to create their own file systems on the disk and to declare their own layout of the file systems on the disk. Or if any application wants to repair the file system which is present in the hard disk, it is also possible. For example, let's say you have a database application. The database application wants to define its own layout of its file system on the disk, then it is possible for the database application to directly access the hard disk and define the layout. So that is one important thing for block devices. And next thing is block devices directly provide the interface with the disk devices, right? So their functionality should be in such a way that disk access should be as fast as possible. Whatever mechanism they use, it should be possible for the application to access the disk as fast as possible. So let's see, if it has to access the disk as fast, then how the block devices will function in such a way that disk access is fast. Let's see about that. So next topic is about how the block device driver will process the request. Okay, before going into that detail, let's try to understand the basics. You're going to have the device driver, you're going to have the hardware which it is interfacing with the operating system. Just try to understand what is the meaning of device driver. Device driver will control there is a particular device driver for every type of device. Okay, if you take a magnetic hard disk, there will be a device driver for the hard disk. If you take a sound card, there will be a device driver for the sound card. So for every specific type of device, there will be a special type of device driver available. And what is the function of this device driver? It is usually a bit of code. It's a program which will act as an interface between the hardware and the operating system. So in case, let's assume that you are having device driver for the magnetic hard disk. The function of the device driver will be to the application will ask the device driver to read some data from the hard disk. Just to recall the structure of the magnetic hard disk. Already we have learned it, hard disk structure, where we have learned that it resembles something like a CD, that CD-like portion is called platter, and the platters are divided into tracks. Tracks are further divided into sectors, and in sectors we will be having the data. So device driver may get requests for reading the data from the hard disk, and so the read-write head of the disk has to move to the desired sector where the data is present, and it has to read the data. So how it will handle that read-write requests, so or accessing of the data from the hard disk. So for that we are having a set of procedures. First thing is, for a block device driver, what is the meaning of a block is? it is nothing but the unit of input output transfer. It can be in some number of bytes. So the unit of the unit of input output transfer, or in one particular input output operation, how many bytes of data is going to be transferred. So that constitutes your block. And generally what happens is that the device driver will read the block from the particular hardware with which it is associated with, and after reading the block, it has to read it into memory. Okay, it will read the data from the associated hardware, and then it has to read it into memory. So while reading it into memory, it will store it in something called as a buffer. Okay, so buffer is used as an intermediate storage where the device driver will read the block from the underlying hardware and it will store it in the buffer as an intermediate storage. And then now the device driver is going to get requests from user processes to read some data from the sector. So for this, it uses something called as request manager. Okay, for handling the transfer of, for handling the reading and writing of data to and from the buffer, the device driver will use a layer of software called as the request manager. Okay, and it also maintains another list called as request list. Whenever the requests arrive for reading some data from a particular sector, assume that here, let's assume our hardware is magnetic hard disk. And let's assume we are talking about the device driver for the magnetic hard disk. We know that in hard disk, we have our platter divided into tracks, and tracks are divided into sectors. So whenever your request arrives, you may get requests from user processes requesting to read some data from a particular sector. Okay, so all those requests from user processes will be kept in a separate list called as the request list. Every block device driver will maintain a separate request list that is called as list of requests. And all these list of requests will be scheduled according to the CSCAN algorithm. Just to recall the CSCAN disk scheduling algorithm. In CSCAN disk scheduling algorithm, the disk arm will start from one end of the disk and it will move to the other end of the disk, and while it moves, it will process all the requests in that direction. And then when it returns back, it will not process any requests in its return trip. That is the specific feature of this CSCAN algorithm. So whenever requests arrive, it will be inserted into the list. And another thing is it will be sorted in order of increasing starting sector number. Let's say one request is for sector number 183. Another request is for sector number 15. It will be sorted in increasing order, so that whenever the disk arm is moving, it will process all the requests coming in that, which it finds in that order. So, and then what happens is the device driver, after it reads the data from the particular sector, that particular request will be removed from the request list. So in between, if it is processing, when it is processing the requests from the request list, if any new request arrives, it will not be processing it. It will be continuing with its already sorted order of requests. New requests will be considered only later. Okay, this is how the block device driver will process the request. First thing is a buffer is maintained. The device driver will read the data from the appropriate sector and it will store it in the buffer. Okay, the buffer is managed by using something called as request manager. The next thing is device driver maintains something called as request list, and then it will schedule the requests according to CSCAN algorithm, and then it will sort all the requests based on increasing starting sector number based on the sorted order of starting sector number, and then it will do the reading of the data from the particular hardware and store it into the buffer. So this is how the block device driver will process the input output requests. The next type of devices is your character devices. So if your block devices allows for random access to independent fixed size blocks of data. So the opposite is your character devices. Any device driver which does not give you which does not allow for random access to fixed size blocks of data will be considered as a character device. For example, is your mouse and keyboards. And in this character device drivers, they are always associated with a set of functions which will specify so that is for every input output operation which is performed by the device driver, there is a separate set of function which is written, which will take care of performance of the particular input output operation. And another important thing to remember is the kernel will not do any pre-processing for this type of functions. These for every device driver, there is a particular set of function for the corresponding operation, but the kernel will not do any pre-processing. Simply, whenever a request for input-output arrives for a character device, the kernel will simply pass on the request to the character device. It will not do any pre-processing. But the only exception is your terminal devices. Okay. So we have to understand what is the meaning of terminal devices. A terminal is nothing but in Unix. We know that we would have seen that a terminal is used to start every process. For example, we may start one terminal to run one process, and then we may start another terminal to run another process. So devices, in short, devices which provide enhanced input-output capabilities may be considered as terminals, or basically any device which allows the user to interact with the system by passing the input data to the system can be considered as a terminal. Or in Unix terminology, a terminal is also a particular kind of device file which implements a number of additional commands beyond the read-write commands, is also considered as a terminal. Okay, so you will have this character device drivers to implement terminal devices, right? For those character device drivers alone, kernel will provide some sort of support. Usually, kernel will not provide any pre-processing, but here for terminal devices alone, one common terminal devices, as I told, the teletypes which was used in the olden days, which resembled a typewriter-like structure through which input was given to the system. So that is one example of a terminal device. So for this, the kernel provides some some additional help with the help of a standard structure called as TTY_struct structure. So this provides a standard interface between the character device drivers and the user. So what help it provides with the help of this TTY_struct structures is it provides for buffering and flow control. We know that terminal devices will get the input from the user and they are going to pass it to the line discipline. Already we have learned. So while doing this task, the kernel will provide buffering and flow control. That is, the data which is taken as input from the user will be stored in a buffer, and that will be maintained by the kernel. So this buffering and flow control help is provided by the support is provided by the kernel only for terminal devices. So next is about the line discipline. As told earlier, the line discipline is responsible for getting the data from the terminal drivers, and it will process the data and it will transfer the data. It is responsible for transferring the processed data between the kernel space and the user space. So line discipline basically acts as an interpreter for the information which it is receiving from the terminal device. And specifically, since it is used for terminal devices, we call it as TTY discipline. And the most common functionality of this TTY discipline is it will bind let's say a user opens a terminal in Linux or Unix. Okay, there will be a data stream for the terminal. That data stream for the terminal has to be binded with the standard input-output stream of the user. Okay, any running process will have a standard input-output stream. You have to bind the data stream of the terminal with the input-output stream of the running process. Then only input-output can be carried out in the terminal. And that is done by this TTY discipline. TTY line discipline is responsible for binding the data stream of the terminal with the input-output stream of the running process. Then only communication can take place between the user, between the running process and the terminal. And why this job is complicated is because in any system, it is not going to have only single process. It may have many processes running simultaneously, and so it has to take care of dynamically attaching and detaching the terminal's input and output. Why it has to be attached and detached is, let's say a running process goes to sleep state. If it is performing some input-output operation, then it may go to it may be blocked, or it may be suspended due to some reason. So, or when it goes to sleep state, it may be awakened later. So when the processes are suspended, the line discipline will be detaching the terminal's input output from the terminal's data stream. When they are awakened, it will be attaching the terminal's input output with the terminal's data stream. So this has to be done by the line discipline, and that is one important task performed by the TTY line discipline. Next topic is about inter-process communication in the Linux operating system. So in Linux, it basically provides a number of mechanisms for processes to communicate with each other. So why do processes have to communicate with each other in Linux? Is for a variety of reasons. Let's say when one process has to communicate to another process about some occurrence of an event. What do I mean by event here is, let's say if the user presses the Control C button, or if the user presses the Control Z keys, everything is an event. Okay, so one process might inform another process about some occurrence of an event, or sometimes processes may want to exchange data among one another. So in that case also, communication has to take place. So what are the different mechanisms for this is, we are going to study about the different reasons for inter-process communication. So basically, we are going to study about synchronization and signals, which is used as the inter-process communication mechanism whenever some event has occurred. And the second mechanism is how the transfer of data from one process to another takes place. So first is about synchronization and signals in inter-process communication. Now, what is the meaning of signal is? Signal is the standard mechanism used in Unix and Linux to inform a process that a particular event has occurred. Okay. So as I told, when the user presses the Control C button or the Control C keys, Control Z keys, then particular event is said to have occurred and it has to be informed. So another thing to remember is signals can be sent from any process to any other process, but you have some restrictions when a process wants to send the signals to processes owned by other users. And then only we have limited number of signals available. And another important thing is signals cannot carry information. Okay, only the process will only be informed that a particular event has occurred, and any other additional information cannot be obtained by the process with the help of signals. And another thing is signals are generated not only by processes, it can also be generated by the kernel. For example, kernel may send a signal to the parent process when a child terminates, or when the timer expires, kernel may send a signal to the waiting process. When data arrives on the network, kernel may send a signal to the server process. So all these are examples of some signals which are sent by kernel. And some real-time example of signal is, for example, when the user presses the Control and the C keys on the keyboard, a SIGINT signal gets generated. So this SIGINT, what it will do is it will cause the process to be immediately terminated. When the user presses the Control and Z keys, a SIG-T STP signal gets generated and it will cause the suspension of the process. Whenever the user presses the Control and the backslash keys, an abort signal gets generated and the process will be immediately terminated. So these are some examples of some signals which will be generated, some events which will happen, and the signals which will be sent because of the occurrence of such events. If you want to know the list of all the signals which is supported by your system, you can use the command kill space -1. So with that command, you can see the list of all the signals supported by your system. So the next is scheduling states and wait queue structures. So previously we learned about signals, and whenever some event occurs, one process can inform the occurrence of the event to another process with the help of signals. But internally, Linux kernel does not use the mechanism of signals to communicate among the processes which are running in kernel mode. Okay, internally, whenever asynchronous events occur, then such communication about asynchronous events takes place through the use of something called as scheduling states and wait queue structures. Now, what is the meaning of this asynchronous events is events that can happen at any arbitrary time during program execution is called asynchronous events. For example, data becoming available in a network connection, or when a pending input-output operation is completed, is all an example of asynchronous events. It can happen at any time, or any arbitrary time. We don't know at which time it will happen. So such types of synchronous events communication usually happens with the help of scheduling states and wait queue structures. So what is the meaning of that is, let's say a process is going to wait for some event to get completed. Let's say one process is waiting for a pending input-output operation. So what it will do is, it will place itself onto a wait queue for that event. For every event, a wait queue will be generated, and all the processes which are waiting for that event will be put in the wait queue. The process will put itself on the wait queue, and it will change its state to non-runnable state. Since the process is changing its scheduling state to non-runnable, here we call this method as scheduling states and wait queue structures. The process will change its state to non-runnable, and it will inform the scheduler that it is not eligible for execution currently. Then once the event is completed, event means, let's say if it's waiting for a pending input output operation, then if the input output operation is completed, then the wait queue will wake up every process which is sleeping on the wait queue. Every process which is waiting for that event on the wait queue will be awakened. Okay, so in this manner, multiple processes can be awakened at the same point of time. Multiple processes which are waiting for a single event may be awakened simultaneously. Let's say you have many processes which are trying to read a file from the disk. Once the data is available in the memory, then all of them which are waiting for that event in the wait queue would be awakened simultaneously. So that is about scheduling states and wait queue structures. Next is the semaphore mechanism for asynchronous events. So just now I told you what is the meaning of asynchronous event. Event which can happen at any arbitrary time during program execution is called as asynchronous event. For asynchronous event, you can also, Linux also adopts the semaphore mechanism. So what is the meaning of semaphore mechanism? This semaphore mechanism has been adopted from System 5 Unix. And we know what is the meaning of semaphores. Semaphore is nothing but an integer variable which provides access to a common resource by multiple processes. And if you have binary semaphores, they take on only the two values 0 or 1. So yes, so with that semaphores concept also, it is helpful for communicating the asynchronous events among processes. And then but the advantage of using the semaphores is that you can share the semaphores can be shared among multiple processes, and as we know, operations can be performed atomically when we use semaphores. What is the meaning of atomic execution is, when some process is accessing the common resource by using semaphore, no other process will be allowed to access the common resource. That is the meaning of atomic operation. And so internally, this semaphore mechanism is used along with the wait queue mechanism for process synchronization. Whenever processes are communicating with semaphores, then wait queue mechanism is used along with it to provide synchronization among processes. The next one is, one reason for inter-process communication is signals. That is, when some event occurs, one process has to communicate with another process. Another reason for passing the data, another reason for inter-process communication is to pass the data between processes. And so how data can be communicated between processes is by using two different mechanisms in Linux. One is the pipe mechanism and the other one is the shared memory mechanism. So with pipe mechanism, any child process can inherit a communication channel from its parent process, and it can write the data to one end of the pipe, and it can be read from the other end of the pipe. So one example is this pipe command in Unix or Linux. This symbol is used as the pipe command. You can see that the output of this command can be passed as the input to this command. So cat contents.txt, we can read the contents of the contents.txt file, and then WC is the word count, which will read the number of words in that particular file, and it will and you will be getting the number of words in that particular file as output. So here this symbol is called as the pipe symbol or the pipe command. So in Linux, just like as I told you, any stream which is capable of handling the input or output will be considered as a file only. And pipes are also considered as another type of inode objects for the virtual file system software. And pipes also make use of wait queues in order to synchronize between the reading and the writing operations. So pipes are one way of passing the data between different processes, and another way of passing the data between different processes is by using the shared memory mechanism. So in this shared memory mechanism, we can communicate large amounts of data or small amounts of data. What is shared memory is, let's say if three processes wants to communicate with each other through shared memory, we'll be having a common region of memory. Like process P1 may allocate some portion of its memory as shared memory. So in this shared memory will exist in the address space of process P2 and P3 also. So then whatever data process P1 is placing in the shared memory, that is immediately available to processes P2 and P3 also. That is the concept of shared memory. Shared memory is nothing but a common region of memory which can be created by using the address space of one of the sharing processes. And then when data is placed into the shared memory by one process, it can be immediately read or accessed by other processes which are sharing the memory with one another. And the advantage of this concept is whenever one process places its data on the shared memory, it can be immediately read by the other processes which are involved in the shared memory. The disadvantage is that it doesn't provide any synchronization. Let's say if the receiving processes are waiting for some data, they cannot ask the operating system whether that particular data has been written to the shared memory or not. They have to keep waiting. They cannot, there is no synchronization among the processes. Or whenever a write operation is performed by one of the processes, whether they have to suspend their execution or not, that is not known to the other processes. So that is the disadvantage. And commonly this shared memory is implemented as a persistent object in Linux operating system, which that means it can be created by processes or it can be deleted by processes, and it can be treated as if it is a small independent address space. And just like we do paging using Linux paging algorithms for other pages residing in the normal memory, we can do paging for this shared memory also. So swapping in and swapping out of the pages on the shared memory is also possible. And usually since the shared memory is implemented as an object, it acts like a backup for the shared memory regions. That is, the data present in the shared memory is usually stored in the shared memory object. And some real-time facts, current real-time facts about the shared memory is, there are two separate APIs in Linux systems for implementing the shared memory. That is, we have system calls in the System5 API, which is used back from the olden days. The legacy System5 API provides a lot of system calls to implement the shared memory concept. And we have most recent POSIX API, which also provides a lot of system calls for implementing the shared memory concept. And if you ask me where the shared memory actually resides, which directory is used to implement the shared memory concept, from the Linux 2.6 kernel version, inside the device directory, you have a folder called SHM, which is implemented as shared memory in the form of RAM disk. And mostly it is implemented as a world writable directory, which means any user can create files and store it in this directory. But SHM directory is mainly used for implementing shared memory, and it is stored in the memory. So that is all about how input output and inter-process communication is performed in the Linux operating system. To summarize, we saw that for input output, since Linux is a derivative of the Unix operating system, it follows mainly the input output model of the Unix operating system. So in Unix operating system, every device which is capable of handling input or output of a stream of data will be considered as a file. So in Linux also, all device drivers appear as normal files to the user. And basically we saw that there are three types of input output devices in Linux, namely block devices, character devices, and network devices. In block devices, we learned that it is nothing but any device which allows random access to any independent fixed size blocks of data will be called as a block device. And we learned that it is used to store file systems. And we also saw that block device driver will maintain a request list, and it will use CSCAN scheduling algorithm to schedule the request and read the data from the particular hardware device which is associated with it. And in character devices, it allows for random access to fixed size blocks of data. It is provided with a special set of functions to perform its operations. And kernel usually doesn't provide any pre-processing, but only for terminal devices, the kernel will provide some standard interface in the form of TTY_structures. And then we saw inter-process communication is needed for synchronization and signals, and also for passing of data among processes. For synchronization and signals, we saw what is the meaning of a signal and what are all the different characteristics of signals. And we saw that kernel usually communicates about asynchronous events among the kernel processes running in kernel mode with the help of scheduling states and wait queue structures. And we also saw kernel also makes use of semaphore mechanism for asynchronous events. And passing of data between processes in Linux usually takes place with the help of pipe mechanism and the shared memory concept. So that is all about input output and interprocess communication in the Linux operating system.